Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Aaron Boyd, Senior Editor for Technology and Events at Nextgov, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Cybersmart 2020, Who Wants to be a Cyber Whiz, hosted by Nextgov and Route 50, and underwritten by Carasoft and FireEye. There's a lot of noise out there when it comes to cybersecurity, from best practices to new developments and regulations, but in today's session, we'll have an interactive conversation with you, the audience, to cut through today's cyber buzz and create meaningful insights. Joining me today for today's interactive session is Terry Kalka, Chief of Mission Support for the Department of Defense, Defense Industrial Base Collaborative Information Sharing Environment. Before we get started with the program, though, I'd like to point out the Q&A tab on the right of your screen. That's how you'll be able to ask questions. We'll also be deploying some polling and trivia questions throughout today's session, but we'll talk more about those questions throughout the program. We're trying out something new today, and for it to be successful, we'll need all of you to participate. So get ready to learn, share, and collaborate with your peers. This webcast is also being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. So before we get jumping into our first question, Terry, could you introduce yourself a bit? Let everybody out there know what you do, who you are, and what that long title I said before, what does that actually mean?
Thanks, Aaron. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to our Defense Industrial Base partners, my pals in the GovIT space, and everyone else tuning in today. Again, the organization name, DoD-Defense Industrial Base Collaborative Information Sharing Environment, we pronounce that DICE, D-C-I-S-E. DICE is one of the directorates for the Department of Defense Cybercrime Center, DC3. And the mission of DICE is to execute the Department of Defense's DIB cybersecurity program. This is a voluntary partnership of over 700 defense contractors, companies of all sizes and all levels of cyber expertise to exchange cyber threat information. This can be indicators of compromise. These can be more detailed analysis. And this is also a networking opportunity for our DIB partners to get to know each other and exchange information amongst themselves. So within mission support, my primary role is to make sure we are actively engaging and connecting with and communicating with our defense industrial base partners. It's quite apart from the folks in DICE who do all of the technical analysis and super smart stuff. So thank you for the welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So just to clarify, so DICE, it's not necessarily about proactively helping the defense industrial base fix their problems, right? You're not going into companies and changing their firewalls or putting in new tools. You're more about sharing information so that they can stay ahead of emerging threats. Is that right?
That's right. We are not we're not incident response folks.
Okay.
We are first and foremost sharing cyber threat indicators and, again, contextual information. Firstly, from government sources that we are able to work with to provide information, most often at the unclassified and for official use only levels. And then secondly, information reported to us from our trusted defense industrial base partners. The basic idea is that if there is an incident or activity, suspicious or malicious activity affecting one of our DIB partners, they're probably going to be trying to affect several of our others. So we receive reports of activity, we anonymize it so that the reporting company is not identified, and then we distribute the indicators of compromise and other analysis throughout all 700 companies within the DIB that we support.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to start phasing into the questions and explanations part of this, the game part of Who Wants to be a Cyber Whiz. So Haley, can we get the first question up? So everybody can see that poll question there. Feel free to put your answers in. And when at the end of this, what we're going to do is just have a chat about what you all are thinking, what Terry thinks about your answers, if you guys are spot on or if you're a little bit off. Some of these are going to be multiple choice like this one. Some of them are going to be a bit more open-ended. We're going to ask you for your specific thoughts on a few things. But let's give you guys a few more minutes here to weigh in. Terry, what do you think of this question as people are talking about it? Why is this something that people need to be thinking about?
Well, I think with this question, what we see are 5 relatively basic cybersecurity practices that don't have to be profoundly expensive and profoundly complicated and are likely to mitigate a good, I'm going to say roughly 85% of the attacks you might face just sitting out on the internet.
Mm.
A lot of this is basic hygiene, or again, very standard practices. Some of the industry folks I talk to find some of these more challenging than others. And even within the department, we've been working on improving our game with some of these. But again, this stuff will cover, apart from truly advanced actors who have far more know-how than most of the rest of us, this will cover a lot of the problems you're going to face in cyber.
So outside of the question itself, which is asking people to pick one of the five, it's generally Dice's recommendation that you're doing all five to start.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is, to spoil something, this is a little bit of a trick question because there's no, I would submit there is no single one best answer. Because if you're doing, restricting administrative privileges, but you're not filtering any of the email or any of the attachments coming in, you're not really doing a whole lot to help yourself.
Mm.
I would say probably the least understood and least accepted one I've seen in my career is software patching and updating.
Mm.
And it's easy for me to say patch all your software. I understand in a complex global organization, heck, within DoD, it's not easy to say, okay, everybody, patch your systems and away you go. But if you're working with vendors who release security patches, frankly, I would prioritize that over a lot of other things because that's what's going to eliminate vulnerabilities within your systems.
Well, the audience, some of them agree with you. Software patching came in right in the middle of the five answers. The most popular response here was multi-factor authentication. So that's definitely an interesting one. Personally, I find multi-factor, obviously, it's one of the things you need to have, right? I haven't seen the final answer in multi-factor. Mostly I say that because most multi-factor I find works through a device like a smartphone, something you own, and I can't seem to keep that thing in my pocket. So for around multi-factor, let's start with that as the most popular response. What have you seen developing in that? What are some of the issues that DIB companies are running into with that?
Well, I'll tell you, I sympathize with your problem because I have two phones, one for work and one for personal use. And here at my desk in Fort Living Room, they're always somewhere in the room, but I'm never quite sure where they are. And then my watch will buzz with a notification, and I'm like, awesome, where's my phone?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so the challenges with multi-factor have a couple of elements to them. One is there isn't one answer for every type of technology out there.
Mm.
Some platforms are amenable to, phone-based or device-based authentication. Not every platform you work with is going to readily recognize whatever multi-factor solution you're trying to deal with. Then you'll have, depending on the environment you're in, specific contractual requirements or specific security requirements. For example, the Defense Industrial Base has an obligation to report cybersecurity incidents based on a DFARS clause. And to make that report, you're required to have a medium assurance certificate to support additional authentication. Everyone with the DFARS clause is supposed to have that. That doesn't mean every company has gone out and gotten one yet.
Yeah. We got a question in the Q&A, and thank you for submitting that question. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but that's definitely what we want to happen, right? Yeah, this is a very interactive. We want the audience participation. So by all means, if you all have something to say, throw it in the Q&A tab. One of the questions we got, though, is what happens if the phone is compromised? Do you have any advice for people for having maybe a defense in depth or a multi-tiered option for multi-factor?
So all of this is risk management, right? I often liken cybersecurity to going to the doctor, right? No procedure is 100% guaranteed to fix your problem. No procedure is 100% safe, and we are always weighing the threat of an incident against the overhead of maintaining security. So if you're doing multi-factor through your phone, of course, your phone becomes a device of interest to an attacker, and then you have additional risk. I don't know that I've ever seen a multi-factor solution that is guaranteed not to have possible vulnerabilities or flaws, whether you have external devices, hardware or firmware. I mean, every one of those is subject to some kind of attack.
I do think it's interesting. Somebody jumped in the comments and offered MDM, so mobile device management, right? So basically, if the device becomes compromised, somebody at the SOC can see that and just shut it down.
Oh, absolutely. So that's if your organization is advanced enough to implement a solution like that. And I would say, we work with, as I said at the beginning of this, defense industrial based companies of all sizes, and a large, prime contractor probably has that sort of thing in place. When you work your way further down the supply chain with smaller and smaller organizations, they're going to be outsourcing more of that capability, or they're maybe not even going to be aware of what that capability is and what it can do for them. So the quick answer again, yeah, if your phone is compromised, you have a problem. If you have a separate token, that's subject to theft.
Yeah.
If you have a firmware solution, each of these gets you more and more secure. They tend to be more expensive. They tend to require, more work to implement. So I'll say there definitely isn't a perfect solution, but I think contemporary thought is a name and a password really isn't enough. It is subject and vulnerable to so many attacks that a separate authentication additional process is absolutely required.
Wanted to spend just a little bit more time, maybe another minute or two on this question and dig into the second tier that people were most interested in, which is restricting administrative privileges. So ICAM solutions, is this something, there's a lot of ways to do credential and access management. Are there cheap ways to do it?
Well, often there are ways that are built into the system that you have. Now, I'm hesitant to recommend something because as a government rep, I'm not here to advocate for a particular vendor or a particular technology. But again, when we look at these basic 5 practices, this is about doing it at all, and I think that's become even more of an issue in the last, where are we now, 5.5 months, pretty much into mass telework, mass work from home, COVID-driven stuff, where one of us is sitting on a computer connected to work. Is that device actually managed by your corporate environment or your government environment or not? And if so, if not, what are the risks involved? Do I have admin access to the computer that I use to connect into my office? And if I do, that presents a pretty risky situation. So these are basics. Any cybersecurity pro is going to look at those 5 things and kind of be like, yeah, of course you do all these things. But it's about making sure that they're followed all the way through, right? You might restrict access to your server. Do you have access to your workstations restricted? Are your shared documents just open because anybody needs access to them? Or have you gone through the process of reviewing who needs access and auditing access to those things?
And then if you want to go even further down the line, you can get to zero trust, which itself is becoming kind of a buzzword. But the idea that just because you gave someone access doesn't mean you should continue to give them access, right? But that's more advanced down the line.
Absolutely.
And as we've been talking about all this, and we're talking about the industrial base, for a long time, the defense companies, contractors have really had to self-attest that they're doing all these things, right? That they're being good about it. That's not going to be true for long. In fact, Haley, let's cue up the second question, which is about a topic I know everybody on this webcast cares about: CMMC. So we can see here, we're trying to get an idea of the understanding of CMMC among you all participating today. But the basic idea here is that you're going to be, as a defense contractor, you're going to be required to go through an assessment from a third-party assessment organization to actually ensure that you're meeting a certain base level of cybersecurity. There's going to be multiple tiers and all that. As everyone's answering the question, Terry, what's your role in all of this, in the CMMC implementation?
That's a good question, because although we are in the Department of Defense, my organization is not involved with the development of CMMC. So we're kind of watching this thing evolve as everyone else is. And it's been fascinating to watch. And I have to give the folks at Undersecretary of Defense, ANS, a lot of credit, the CMMC Accreditation Board, a lot of credit. This has moved faster and with more power than I think probably anybody imagined about a year ago when we first started hearing about it. And it's nigh on being a thing that we all have to work with. That said, we are primarily, of course, as soon as companies hear that this exists, they want to know, okay, how do I get compliant? What's it going to take? How far off am I? Can I keep my contracts, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things we offer within our defense industrial base program, defense industrial base cybersecurity program, is a cyber resilience assessment. It is a 6 to 8 hour, you can either do it on your own or we'll facilitate it for you. And it's designed to give you a baseline, and it is aligned to CMMC up through level 3, but it gives you a baseline of cybersecurity resiliency and maturity within your organization. It's not something you can then take to your contract officer and say, here, I passed. It's a quick way, and for the members of our program, it's a free way to at least see yourself and see where you are and where you have to go.
Interesting. So, interesting that we've got quite a range of responses here. I'm gonna go backwards from the least. So the least amount of people think that it's that defense contractors under $1 million are excluded. Very few people seem to think that they would be excluded. Let's see here. About 10% of people thought contractors who have already received prior defense federal acquisition regulations, DFARS compliance, would be excluded. 10% think both defense contracts under 1 million and government contractors who are not contracting with DoD would be excluded. The highest regular answer is A, which happens to be correct. Government contractors who are not contracting with DoD, basically any civilian government contractors are not under these requirements right now. I do think it's also interesting we had a very, very high rate of no response, which either tells me that people are just more interested in hearing what we have to think about this, or they aren't quite sure, which with CMMC, I think is very likely part of the answer. If you all want to jump in the Q&A and let me know which way it goes, I'd be interested to hear from you on that as well, if you're just additionally confused or not feeling like playing along. But it is interesting to see this spread, because I think there's a lot of confusion around here. What are you seeing in these results, Terry?
Well, first of all, there is a technical answer that is not on this list, which is at this exact moment, nobody is required to obey CMMC, right?
Right.
Today,
yeah.
And this is really important because what we've seen are certain companies that have already been promoting themselves as CMMC certified, either certified to contract with the government or certified to assess other companies. I'm sorry, that simply isn't true. No company right now is certified in anything with CMMC. The CMMC Accreditation Board is now doing initial training for the C3 PAOs, the third-party assessors, from the same government that brought you Jedi. And over time, in the next several months and into 2021, yeah, we are going to start to see folks who are legit certified with CMMC. But nobody is certified right now, and nobody is required to be. So technically, that's the most correct answer.
That's fair. I will say though, because I largely cover more of the civilian side than defense. We dip our toe into defense now and again, particularly with things like CMMC and supply chain and the like. But what I've seen on the civilian side is one, a push already to get civilian contractors to abide by CMMC as well. And we even see it in some solicitations that are going out for like large GWACs and IDIQs that are targeting both civilian and defense. They're putting clauses in there that basically say, get your CMMC certification no matter who you are, because you're probably going to want it down the line.
The early levels of CMMC are very standard, highly recommended cybersecurity practices. Whether you deal with controlled unclassified information or not, an awful lot of CMMC, has been, and for those who don't know the history, CMMC was largely adopted from the NIST standard 800-171. 800-171 was a heavily reduced set of controls out of 853. DoD's been living with 853, and the federal government's been living with 853 for years. So most of the recommendations within CMMC, again, if you've been in this business for a while, very little of this would be surprising to you as a recommendation. So CMMC is not 100% signed into law yet for DoD, and it certainly isn't for other agencies in the federal government. But there is absolutely a lot of talk about adapting CMMC to other agencies.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, I think we need a cybersecurity standard. We need some form of objective auditing and validation, because self-attestation just doesn't work. So there we are.
Yeah, we got a question in the Q&A asking about FISMA moderate. Somebody is currently FISMA moderate equivalent compliant. Is there a crosswalk from FISMA to CMMC?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know that anyone has done that, but I'm sure if you reach out to your pals in the industry, someone has done that. The difference is this, though. I want to be real clear. FISMA is really about cloud cybersecurity. So if you are FISMA compliant, you have met certain general government requirements for cloud security. That doesn't mean that you have followed or are compliant with DoD requirements, because DoD uses what are called impact levels for cloud security. And I've had this conversation so many times in the last year or two, I never get tired of pointing this out. There really isn't a one-to-one relationship between a FISMA compliance and DoD impact level. And that's been a huge problem in telework land, where to handle controlled unclassified information, to handle the kind of data you'd find on the NIPRNet, you really need to be at DoD impact level 4.
I'm wondering, do they mean FISMA or do they mean FedRAMP?
Oh my gosh.
Right, because I'm reading this as FISMA, but FISMA is the agencies themselves attesting their cybersecurity to OMB versus FedRAMP, which is the GSA-based program that assesses the cybersecurity of a product.
Yeah, can we erase the part of the recording where I just completely confused FISMA and
No, because
FedRAMP?
I was doing the same thing as I read it to you. And to the questioner, if you wouldn't mind jumping back in the Q&A and just clarifying if you did mean FISMA or you meant FedRAMP. And I only question what you wrote because I hear this a lot about FedRAMP, right? And I think it is worth mentioning that they are, while they feel similar, they are not, right? FedRAMP is about the product you're selling to the government, versus CMMC is about the products mostly that you use within your own company, right? It's how you are securing your company, not whether the products you're delivering are secure. So they're kind of like two sides of the same coin. So we're going to move on for now, but to that commenter, if you jump back in the chat and it turns out you were meaning something more specific about FISMA, we can get back to that a little bit later as well. But for right now, we're going to take a pause in this conversation with Terry for some remarks from our underwriter, FireEye. So please welcome Tom Topping, Senior Director of Strategic Programs at FireEye. Tom?
Good afternoon, everyone. Cue the question, please. Thank you. I'll give everybody a moment to read that. So a little bit from my background, I started my professional career as a programmer, and I later became a senior network architect at one of the major router companies. I've held various leadership positions in technology companies since then. And in the next 8 or 9 minutes, I hope to leave you with a couple of thoughts and perhaps a desire to check out some new technology that is on the market from multiple vendors. The correct answer, we don't have everyone in, but I'm gonna spoil it for you here. The correct answer is C, 9%. And I have to tell you, when I saw that, I was wondering, how can that be, right? You know, is somebody changing the definitions or cherry picking the data? And after I started digging around a little bit, I found a lot of information that was interesting, and some of which I'm going to talk about right now. So I hope that you walk away with 2 thoughts today. One is that there are a lot of reasons why security controls today are not behaving as expected. Complexity and human error are among the most significant. And this new security technology I'm talking about is called security validation, and it's a real game changer. So the way I'll go about this is to talk about additional findings from the same data analysis that provided answer to the question here. And I'm a student of human behavior, and if the human behavior aspect of what I'm talking about is interesting, I encourage you to check out the works of authors like Charles T. Munger, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and Malcolm Gladwell. Well, anyway, the 9% number is an aggregate number across different types of tests that were run against production environments in large enterprises. The types of tests, what I mean is, there are various steps in the cyber attack lifecycle. Before I dive into the results by category, let me just give you the bluff. The bluff is that security controls aren't performing as people expect that they are. And you'll get a good feel for the various contributing factors to that. So due to the time constraint, I'm only going to cover 4 of those. And those are reconnaissance, infiltration, lateral movement, and data exfiltration. And for each of the 4, I'm going to provide 4 metrics. And I love saying measured security performance metrics, because the entire industry has been woefully short of this critically important information that practitioners and leaders need to make informed decisions. Well, I got sidetracked. So again, 4 tests, 4 performance numbers for each. Those are prevented, detected, alerted, and missed. So by prevented, I mean it was blocked. By detected, I mean it was identified and correctly categorized as a potential threat. By alerted, I mean it made it all the way to the SOC and alert popped up for operations. And by missed, I mean utterly, completely, and totally missed with no indicators that the activity was happening. So note that the numbers can add up to more than 100% because alerted is a subset of detected, and attacks can be either or both detected and prevented. So, okay, here come the numbers. These were from global companies in 11 industries using 123 security technologies, affecting over 130 million consumers. And in the reconnaissance category, those technologies prevented 37% of reconnaissance. They detected only 26%. They alerted on 4%. And they missed completely 54%. And some of the contributing factors for this were network segmentation, misconfiguration, score 1 for errors, and the inside traffic not being monitored as robustly as external DMZ or gateway traffic. And it helped me to understand these numbers to realize that reconnaissance can happen externally. And this happens all the time for organizations getting port and service scanned. And if an organization is having their SMTP directory harvested, a harvest attack, or someone's doing an open bucket scan against your cloud infrastructure, these are things that the SOC really wants to see alerts on. There's also internal reconnaissance, and this might be because an actor's inside or because there's an insider and they're looking around to see what's available, what's open, if they can run RDP and do things like that. So these are definitely reconnaissance activities that the SOC wants to know about. For infiltrations, the prevented was 35%, the detected was 21%, alerted was 7%, and missed was 68%. Systems were deployed out of the box. We found in a lot of organizations that was a contributing factor. And there were also security controls that failed into open positions, and that was score 1 for complexity there. For lateral movement, it was 37% prevented, 26% detected, 4% alerted, and 54% missed. Some of the contributing factors here were, again, network segmentation, misconfiguration, and lack of internal security control points and monitoring inside. For data exfiltration, I'll talk about is 29% prevented, 31% detected, 11% alerted, and 67% missed. Again, fail open conditions on security controls and misconfiguration of security controls were 2 of the major contributing factors in not detecting data exfiltration. So 2 real-world quick examples, and I'll wrap up. A large health provider had concerns about APT41, who's a Chinese that Mandiant has been tracking since 2012. They started out in criminal activity against gaming infrastructures, and since 2014, they've been doing both criminal activity and state-sponsored espionage. And they've been after the healthcare industry, and this organization used security validation with integrated threat intelligence to discover that its controls were not detecting or preventing the recent TTPs that APT41 was using. And they were able to quickly identify those and close those gaps. The second use case was a government example. The security team used security validation to identify that their network firewall was only blocking 24% of the executed attacks. And they used the detailed information from those attacks to work with their vendor to triple the blocking rate that the firewall was able to achieve and cranked 24% up to 74%. So I'll draw your attention to two reports. One is the 2020 Mandiant Security Effectiveness Report, which talks in much greater detail than I have about this topic. The second is the Verizon Data Breach Report, which has an entire section on errors. And with a little bit of levity, Verizon awarded errors the best supporting action of the year. And finally, I hope that you see human error is alive and well in cybersecurity, and that human error is exacerbated by too many alerts, being understaffed, staff turnover, and being expected to deliver security against an infrastructure that is undergoing rapid transformation. These are very challenging. In this environment, the fastest way to deal with this complexity and identify and resolve the errors that present the most risk is to use security validation against the production environment to see where the holes are. So these are just two of the many benefits that security validation brings to organizations. And I'll wrap up by saying thank you for listening. And back to you, Aaron. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, reminds me of I wrote this thing years ago about Shannon's maxim, right? Claude Shannon, the enemy knows the system, or the enemy knows everything. And I like to turn that on its head, because with enemy knows the system, we ended up with large number factorization, right? And encryption as we know it. So they were able to solve that problem. So I like to turn it on its head to the user knows nothing. Until we can get to a point where we can fix the fact that the user is going to make all kinds of errors, as you and Verizon put it, we're never going to have any kind of real security, because as a user myself, I'm really stupid.
Well, you can have the perfect solution, but humans are running it, and all you have to do is look at my home network to find a bunch of errors. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah. So Terry, back to our conversation. We've got one more question for the audience, and in fact, Haley, if you could throw that up. It's an open-ended question, so we're going to ask you all to put your answers into the Q&A tab so that we can see what you all think about this. So that is in the chat right now for anybody looking at it. I'll also just read it off real quick so you can all hear it. The 2021 National Defense Authorization Act has not been signed yet, but both the House and Senate bills may require contractors to be part of cyber threat intelligence sharing programs. Now, this is something that Terry in particular is interested in, so we're going to chat about that a bit. But we're also interested in hearing from all of you what parts of the current NDAA as proposed is of most importance for you and your organization. So let us know what some of those are in the chat or the Q&A. We'll be looking at both. And then Terry and I can chat about some of those. Before we get to that, while you all are thinking about that, Terry, I want to go back to our last question, because the original poster on the FISMA question responded. He was talking about FISMA, not FedRAMP. And he's saying that they are using the 800-53A. So back to his original question, even if there isn't an official crosswalk from that to CMMC, does that set companies up to be ready for those CMMC evaluations?
So what, and actually I realized I can't respond in the Q&A pod. I was trying to slip a message in there to our questioner. I don't know off the top of my head of a map from 853 to CMMC. I'm not saying they don't exist. However, you can easily find maps that go from 853 to 800-171. And if you're following 800-171, you are a very long way towards, your CMMC dream.
Yeah. At least level one.
So level one definitely is built off of 800-171, but each of the levels up to level 3 are substantially driven by what's in 800-171.
Mm-hmm. Level 2 is just 171B, I think, last time I had heard.
So 171B is definitely more at levels 3 and 4.
Oh, okay.
So the department, and forgive me because I can't remember right now if it is going to be 171B or if it's going to have another name on it. But those are additional controls for critical systems or systems with very sensitive data. So the department expects that only a very small percentage of contractors will need CMMC levels 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. The majority of defense contractors writ large, the expectation is that they will only need to go to level 1. Something mm-hmm. like, I think I heard Ms. Arrington in a talk this morning, 270,000 out of 300,000 companies probably only need to go to level 1, which again is the very basic stuff that we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. There's another chunk that will need to get up to level 3, and that's, for those that have been looking at NIST 800-171, that have been looking at the DFARS clause for the last few years, that's kind of where that stuff all tops off. So what you're going to see at level 3 is pretty much all the 800-171 controls plus some additional controls that have come from other sources. And then at levels 4 and 5, you see advanced controls, again, for systems that are going to house extremely sensitive data for critical DoD programs.
So far, we've only gotten one response to the third question. So apparently none of you care about what's in the NDAA. That's what I'm hearing. Oh, here we go. The first one we got so far from people who do care about what's in the NDAA is anticipated funding levels in IT systems and cybersecurity. So that's pretty broad, but I think it's something we can boil down to chat about. How much, when you talk to the DIB and people who are coming in about their issues with cybersecurity, how often are they just looking at you and saying two things? One, but the Defense Department doesn't have that great cybersecurity. We don't see you all spending much on it. Or two, what kind of funding can you all give us to make our cybersecurity better? Are those questions that you get a lot?
Those are questions I've heard asked. In my organization, we don't usually get those kinds of questions because we're really in the information sharing biz. We're not the auditors. We are not the compliance officers. We're there to receive information and share it to support the DIB as they defend sensitive data. That said, without myself making a claim for the strength of DoD cybersecurity, I say I've seen it get better over the years, like everyone else. And DoD has pretty rigorous cybersecurity requirements. When 800-171 became the requirement for DoD contractors, there were some folks who complained about how tough it is. But again, 800-171 is a subset, maybe a third of what we in the DoD hold ourselves to in terms of securing systems. And I'm not saying we get it right all the time. I'm certainly not saying we're perfect or impervious to intrusion. But when we roll these sets of controls out, we're not just kind of making it up to make your lives harder. This is stuff that over time has been proven by and large to work pretty well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I did want to give you a chance as well to talk about the thing in the NDAA that I know you're interested in. It was couched in the question, which is that it may require DIB contractors to be part of a cyber threat intelligence sharing program. Are you talking like your program, like DICE, or like an ISAC, something like that?
Well, that's interesting, and the answer is it may be either one of those or both. There are two competing versions of this bill. There's the House version and the Senate version. I'll take this moment to point out I don't work for the legislative branch of government, so I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm just sharing with you all what I've seen. And in the, where are we? In the House bill, section 1631 says defense industrial based participation in a cybersecurity threat intelligence sharing program. In the Senate, that's section 1632 for those of you playing along at home. There are some differences between the two, but fundamentally, both of these would seem to be encouraging the DoD to either, in one bill it says require, and in another bill it's strongly encourage DIB contractors to be involved with threat information sharing programs. The DIB CS program that we support is absolutely one of those. At the moment, our program is limited to cleared defense contractors, those with facility clearances. Even if our threat data doesn't always cross into the classified realm, that's a requirement for joining the program, and that's been part of federal law for a long time. If you need to join a threat intelligence program and you can't join the DIB CS program, the National Defense ISAC is a great organization to get in touch with. And I would say if you're part of our program, talk to ND ISAC even then, because no one has all the answers to everything. But this struck me as interesting because our program has been voluntary for as long as it's existed, about 12 years. There is no requirement from the government's perspective for the contractor to join the program. But to go back to CMMC, when you get to levels 4 and 5, you'll see requirements about receiving and acting on cyber threat intelligence. So it struck me as very interesting that in these both versions of this proposed legislation, we're looking at possibly an enforcement mechanism for the department to require DIB contractors to be part of threat intelligence programs. Now, in one version of the bill, it basically says you got to join one, and the SecDef can either use one that exists or they can create one. The other one says the SecDef can use one or create one, and the SecDef can choose whether to require you join or to just encourage you to join. So I don't know.
And I imagine when they say SecDef, they're not saying that the Secretary of Defense is going to choose individual companies to cherry pick. It's going to be like a writ large policy.
Right, and it's the way these things are written. It says the Secretary of Defense shall. Well, I learned pretty early in my government career that doesn't mean it's the Secretary of Defense's job.
Right, he's got to sign.
That'll get tasked out to somebody down the line.
Yep.
And you can't say, well, it says it's the Secretary's job. Why do I have to do this? Ultimately, though, I think where this is heading, and I think to go back to some of the things that Mr. Topping pointed out, a lack of awareness and a lack of current information on cyber threat is certainly one of the drivers to disappointing results from security controls. And I won't say our program is perfect, but I will say we've gotten good feedback, and consistent feedback about what we provide is useful to most of our companies, that it helps them to drive security decisions and business decisions, that it helps to make them aware of threats they didn't know about. And whether you come to us or whether you work with a commercial provider or whether you work with an ISAC, you need some source of cyber threat information more than just updating your antivirus, because we know the enemy moves very quickly and they attack very rapidly, and we need to be able to respond rapidly.
Yeah, great. Unfortunately, we are out of time because I do see some more questions trickling in on this topic. And as I mentioned off the top, this is a new format we're trying out. So I think in the future, when we do these open-ended, we'll give you all a little more time to get your questions in so we have some more time to answer them. But what we might try to do, and like I said, we're going to have to feel this out, is Terry, if you wouldn't mind, we might have you just maybe do a quick paragraph on some of these other questions and send them out to the group afterwards. But we'll figure something out. We'll try to get those extra questions answered for you all. For now, though, we've reached the end of our program. Once again, I want to thank all of our speakers for joining us, Terry and Tom, and all of you for tuning in and participating so much. It really made this possible and made this fun, enjoyable, and I think at least a qualified success, if not a full one. The event today would not have been possible without the support of our underwriters, Carasoft and FireEye. The full webcast has been recorded and will be sent to you by the end of the week. Keep a watch out for it in your email and be sure to share the conversation with your colleagues. Thank you again. We hope you stay safe and healthy and have a great rest of your day.